Chapter 6, Surah Al-Kahf, Anti-type of Dajjalism. Glory be to the Almighty, and peace and blessings be upon the seal of the Prophets and his immaculate household. Hadiths suggest that to avoid being deluded by Dajjal, one must read the 18th chapter of the Quran named Al-Kahf. It implies Surah Al-Kahf to be an anti-type of Dajjal's ideology. The Prophet, peace be upon him and his family, predicted for Dajjal's movement to arise from the Kharijites related to Ibn Dhil Khuwaisirah at-Tamimi al-Najdi, reported by Nasai, Hakim, etc. The Wahhabi movement, founded by Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab at-Tamimi al-Najdi in the 18th century, is regarded by most Muslims as a modern Kharijite movement. The extremist Sunni group IS is a Wahhabi force and has been confirmed as Dajjal's army in the essay Dajjal the Impostor had come and will come back. For those who disagree with this conclusion and with our vindication of 12-er Shi'ism and refutation of Sunnism, we will let Surah Al-Kahf decide the matter between them and us. Let us see which ideology is Dajjalism whose anti-type Al-Kahf is, 12-er Shi'ism or Wahhabism. We suggest that before proceeding, the reader should at least once thoroughly read the translation of Surah Al-Kahf. The sharp differences between the 12ers and the Wahhabis in the criteria for relying on a hadith narrator manifest as great differences in hadiths, doctrines and understanding of Islam. We will see that whose hadiths, doctrines and understanding are corroborated by the apparent meanings of the verses and whose are contradicted. Allah said, "Praise be to Allah who has revealed the scripture unto his slave and has not placed therein any crookedness, rather made it straight to give warning of stern punishment from him and to bring unto the believers who do good deeds the news that theirs will be a fair reward." Surah Al-Kahf, verses 1 and 2. Section 1. The people of the cave, Al-Kahf, the hidden Imam, and Al-Ghuraba, the alienated. Verses 9 to 26 deal with the story of the people of the cave, some young believers who took refuge from tyranny and persecution in a cave, discovered in 1963 in Jordan by Rafiq ad-Dajani and found to match all the Quranic details of the cave. They remained asleep in the cave for 309 years. The Wahhabis are strongly opposed to the 12er belief in the occultation of the 12th Imam Mahdi for centuries, a belief which their predecessors, Salaf, have derided as irrational and foolish, like Ibn Taymiyyah in Minhaj as-Sunnah and Ibn Kathir in Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya. But here this Quranic story shows that one of the ways in which Allah protects his chosen slaves from tyrants is by taking them into occultation, be it for centuries, like the people of the cave remained in occultation for over 3 centuries, and like as the 12ers believe the 12th Imam has been in occultation for over a millennium now. So, Surah Al-Kahf corroborates the 12er belief in the occultation of Imam Mahdi and is an antitype of the Wahhabi or Dajjali opposition to it. Because of their pure beliefs, the people of the cave became alienated from their people. Both Sunni and Shia hadiths predict the alienation of the believers in uncorrupted Islam after the Prophet's death until the end times. Shia hadiths indicate these alienated people, Ghuraba, to be the followers of the 12 Imams. For over a millennium, the history of the 12ers has been that of alienation and persecution. The Prophet gave the Ghuraba glad tidings of salvation in the hereafter. Tirmidhi, Tabarani Awsat, Tarikh, Dimashq. See Tabarani Awsat, Volume 5, page 149, Volume 8, page 308. Section 2. A sign of the hour. Sunni hadiths predict for the rise of Mahdi to follow the rise of the second Sufyani. Kitab Al-Fitan of Nu'aym ibn Hammad has whole chapters on it. Shia hadiths too predict for the return of the 12th Imam from occultation to follow the rise of the second Sufyani. The Wahhabis question the logic behind the major occultations spanning centuries, as their role model Ibn Taymiyyah did in Minhaj as-Sunnah. The reason for the 12th Imam to reappear after over a millennium is same as the one for the awakening of the people of the cave and their disclosure after over 300 years. Allah said, "And in like manner we disclosed them so that people might know that the promise of Allah is true and that as for the hour there is no doubt concerning it." Al-Kahf 21. When the 4th Shi'i Imam Ali Zain al-Abidin ibn Hussain once recited the 55th verse of Surah An-Nur 24, he said, "By Allah, These are our Shia of Ahl al-Bayt, about whom Allah will fulfill His promises through a man from us, and he is the Mahdi of this community, about whom the Prophet said, even if there remains only one day on the earth, Allah will prolong it until He will bring forth a pious man from my progeny, whose name is the same as my name, and He will fill the earth with justice and equity, as it was filled with oppression and tyranny. Majma al-Bayan, Tafsir al-Ayyashi, exegesis of Surah 24 An-Nur, verse 55. The following characteristics of the 12th Imam reported from Imam Ali Zain al-Abidin as-Sajjad in Kamal al-Din of Saduq are common with the people of Al-Kahf. A very long life like of Adam and Noah, isolation from the people like of Abraham, fear and occultation like of Moses, release and success after trials and tribulations like of Job. The detailed version of the famous hadith of the tablet Allah predicts for the times of Imam Mahdi's return to be the times of Shiites being subjected to pogroms, blazes, terror, with the earth being stained with their blood. Kamal ad-Din and Al-Kafi, Volume 1, page 527. These words remind of the massive brutalities on Shiites in this Hijra century of the Saddam regime, the Mullah Omar regime, the Jhangvi gangs, the Zarqawi gang, the IS gang and others, in streets, bazaars, mosques, schools, kindergartens, hospitals, maternity centers and everywhere. And the ordeal has continued with the worst yet to come from the second Sufyani in the month and the land of Hajj. Thereafter, the 12th Imam will vanquish and kill him. So, Surah Al-Kahf supports the 12er belief in Imam Mahdi's return after the major occultation and is an anti-type of the Wahhabi or the Jali doubts over it. Section 3. Building tombs and mosques over shrines. Allah said, "Or you think that the people of the cave and the tombstone are a wonder among our signs?" Al-Kahf 9. This verse indicates that after the people of the cave died, their graves are marked with a tombstone. Both Sunni and Shia hadiths discourage plastering ordinary graves and constructions over them, which Shia scholars say is to keep from showing off and extravagance. Otherwise, if needed, they can be marked with tombstones. Kathir ibn Zayed reported from Al-Muttalib, when Usman ibn Maz'un died, he was brought out and buried. The Prophet, God bless him, and his family ordered a man to bring him a stone slab, but he was unable to carry it. Allah's messenger went and rolled up his sleeves. He then carried the stone slab and placed it over the head of the deceased, saying, "I am marking my brother's grave with it and shall bury those of my family who die beside him." Abu Dawood, Al-Muttalib mentioned hearing it from a witness Sahabi. Ibn Hajar classed it as good, Hasan. As for the hadith mentioning the Prophet's order for elevated graves to be leveled, so it also included destruction of idols and pertains to the time when the Prophet, God bless him, and his family began asserting his authority over his non-Muslim subjects in Medina and its environs, where most graves till then were of non-Muslims. So the order was directed at non-Muslims' graves. Bukhari reported from Sufyan at-Tammar that he had seen the Prophet's grave elevated and convex. The 12ers consider the graves of Allah's chosen people the worthiest of being elevated and marked with erections over them as signs and reminders of Allah, while the Wahhabis apply to them the hadith meant for the graves of ordinary Muslims and non-Muslim subjects of the Islamic country. They are even more intolerant of the mosques erected over them, their hatred of which can be gauged from the numerous attacks they have carried out on such mosques since their inception, the most infamous of which include the 2006 bombing of the Golden Mosque housing the shrines of Imam Naqi, Imam Askari and Mahdi's occultation in Iraq's Samarra. The Wahhabis deem such mosques heretical, relying on some narrations which the 12ers consider manufactured, for there are Sunni and Shia hadiths that contradict them. Let us see what Surah Al-Kahf has over it. Allah said, "And in like manner we disclosed them so that people might know that the promise of Allah is true, and that, as for the hour, there is no doubt concerning it." When the people were disputing of their case among themselves, they said, "Erect over them a building, their Lord knows best about them." Those who won their point said, "We shall definitely have a mosque over them." Al-Kahf 21. The people to whom Allah disclosed the miracle of the people of the cave considered marking their graves with some erection over them, and finally a mosque was built over them. Relying on the narrations against such mosques, Ibn Kathir deemed those people heretics, while Shawkani in his Fatah al-Qadir, going by the apparent meaning of the verse, considered those people pious believers. The words of the verse seem to convey that the revelation of this great sign to those people made them believers in the truth of Allah's promise and the advent of the hour, and that the people of the cave were Allah's chosen slaves. As they said, their Lord knows best about them. So in recognition of this great sign in favor of Allah, they built a mosque over the holy graves, wherein to seek Allah's blessings by virtue of the blessed precinct of the shrine. Read the verse again. Allah loves for us to worship Him near blessed memorials, as He said, and have your place of worship by the station of Abraham. Al-Baqarah 125. The station of Abraham, Maqam Ibrahim, is a shrine near the holy Kaaba, consisting of a stone Abraham used as foothold while building the Kaaba. It has on it imprints of Abraham's feet. This verse, Al-Baqarah 125, contradicts the Wahhabi mindset which deems such actions doorways to idolatry, like Umar, who got the tree under which the Prophet took the pledge of Ar-Ridwan, mentioned in Al-Fatah verse 19, cut down during his reign after he saw Sahaba praying near it. Ironically, he claimed to have had advised the Prophet to pray near Maqam Ibrahim even before Al-Baqarah 125 was revealed, clearly a hoax. Likewise, his Wahhabi admirers destroyed the Prophet's tombstone in 1804 AD. The holiest site of Islam, the sacred Grand Mosque, Al-Masjid Al-Haram in Makkah, is built over hundreds of holy graves. The Holy Prophet, God bless him and his family, said, "No prophet who escaped his people had been, but he came to Makkah and worshipped Allah till he died. And there are the graves of Hud, Shu'aib and Salih, peace be upon them, between Zamzam and Maqam. And in the Kaaba are the graves of 300 prophets. Between Rukn Yamani and Rukn Aswad are the graves of 70 prophets." Sunni sources: Kitab al-Buldan of Abu Bakr al-Faqih, Akhbar Makkah of Azraqi, Al-Musannaf of Abd al-Razzaq, volume 5, page 120. Shia sources: Al-Kafi of Kulaini, Al-Faqih and Ilal of Saduq, Bihar al-Anwar of Majlisi. Hijr or Hatim around the Kaaba contains the graves of Hagar, her son Ishmael, and his unmarried daughters, peace be upon them. Sunni sources: Tabari, Ibn Hisham, Ibn Athir, Faqihi, Tabaqat Ibn Sa'd, volume 1, page 25. Shia sources: Al-Faqih of Saduq, Kitab al-Hajj. Furu al-Kafi of Kulaini, Kitab al-Hajj, narrations 14 and 16. The ancient reports about Makkah recorded by Faqihi and Azraqi show that the graves of Hagar, Ishmael and his daughters in Hijr were traditionally known to the Quraysh, and for some financial reason they excluded that area from the Kaaba. But as reported by Aisha, the Prophet, God bless him and his family, wanted to extend the Kaaba over that area because the Kaaba built by Abraham included it. So the Prophet, God bless him and his family, wanted to extend the Kaaba over those holy graves traditionally known to the Quraysh, contrary to the Wahhabi creed. And Al-Masjid Al-Haram stands over so many holy graves, while the Wahhabis call for the demolition of such mosques. So what about the narrations relied upon by the Wahhabis? A narration attributed to the Prophet says, "Of the worst people are those upon whom the hour will come while they are alive, and those who make the graves places of worship." The actual hadith excludes the last phrase as reported by Ibn Mas'ud from the Prophet. "Of the worst people are those upon whom the hour will come while they are alive." Bukhari 7067. The excluded phrase is an Umayyad addition. Complying with the guidance of the Prophet and the Imams, God bless them all, the Shiites developed their holy graves as places of worship, frequenting them, giving salutations to the resting, worshipping Allah and seeking His blessings in their blessed vicinities. Given the emotional fervor these shrines generated in the faithful, the Sunni caliphs feared their potential to serve as rallying centers and missionary bases for the Shiite unrest. The Battle of Karbala, the first Shiite mourning at the Karbala shrine, and the ensuing Tawwabin uprising led by the nonagenarian Sahabi Sulaiman ibn Surd, and the uprisings of Imam Zayd and Nafs Zakiyah gave the Umayyads and Abbasids reasons to fear. Just as the Umayyad tyrant Abdul Malik ibn Marwan got manufactured a pseudo-hadith calling the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem Allah's throne on the earth to divert Muslim pilgrims there where he was based, away from Makkah where his rival Ibn Zubair was based. See Al-Arifi's the essential pearls and gems of Ibn Taymiyyah. Likewise, pseudo-hadiths against shrine mosques were manufactured. For example, the Abbasid tyrant Mutawakkil closed the Karbala shrine mosque and banned the Shiites from gathering there on one hand, and on the other hand, he then lifted the 15-year-old Abbasid ban on hadith narration and summoned major Sunni hadith narrators to the capital Samarra and gave them some orders regarding hadith narration. This same tyrant summoned and confined Imam Naqi and his family to Samarra, peace be upon them. The Sunni narrations condemning shrine mosques, cursing their upholders and likening them to Jews and Christians are thus politically motivated fabrications relied upon by the Wahhabis and contradicted by Al-Kahf 21. So, Surah Al-Kahf endorses the 12-hour practice of having mosques over shrines and is an antitype of the Wahhabi or the Jali attacks on them. Section 4. A similitude for the two parties. A comparison between the following verses of Al-Kahf and an excerpt we are quoting will say it all. Allah said, "Coin for them a similitude, two men, unto one of whom we had assigned 2 gardens of grapes, and we had surrounded both with date palms and had put between them tillage. Each of the gardens gave its fruit and withheld nothing thereof. And we caused a river to gush forth therein, and he had fruit. And he said to his comrade when he spoke with him, I am more than you in wealth and stronger in respect of men. And he went into his garden while wronging himself. He said, I think not that all this will ever perish, and I think not that the hour will ever come. And if indeed I am brought back to my Lord, I shall surely find better than this as a resort." His comrade, while disputing with him, said to him, "Disbelieve you in him, or show ingratitude you to him who created you of dust, then of a droplet, then fashioned you a man? But he is Allah, my Lord, and I ascribe not to my Lord any partner. And why not, when you entered your garden, you said, That which Allah has willed, no strength is but through Allah. Though you see me as less than you in wealth and children, yet it may be that my Lord will give me better than your garden and will send on it a bolt from heaven, and some morning it will be a smooth hillside, or some morning the water thereof will be lost in the earth, so that you cannot make search for it." And his fruit was beset, so he began to wring his hands for all that he had spent on it, while it was now all ruined on its trellises, and to say, "Would that I had not ascribed any partner to my Lord." So he had no troops to help him as against Allah, nor could he take revenge. There manifests the overlordship as belonging to Allah the True. He is best in rewarding and best in finalizing. Al-Kahf 32-44. Wali Nasr's discussion on Minhaj as-Sunnah, Volume 1, pages 379-385. Likewise, Ibn Taymiyyah rejected the special status that Shias accord to Ali as the chosen one of God. How could God choose a leader who failed 3 times in his bid to become caliph, and whose caliphate, when he finally attained it, ended in the debacle of civil war, his own assassination, and the triumph of the Umayyads? Islamic history in its glory and power is a testament to God's favor to Sunnis. Unmoved by the apocalyptic battle between good and evil that drives Shia theology, Ibn Taymiyyah saw worldly success as the most obvious measure of God's favor. The same logic drives Sunni insurgents in Iraq today and explains their determination to deny Shia's worldly power and successful consolidation of their hold over that country. Extending this logic, Ibn Taymiyyah chided Shias for misunderstanding the Sunni view of authority. Sunnis accepted their rulers not because they were the best of Muslims or because better leaders could not exist, but because they performed the functions of leadership well. They provided order and governed effectively. In this pragmatic view, the proof of a leader's worth was his ability to grab power. Good leadership began with ascent to power. That Shia Imams, beginning with Ali, were not able to win power made them ipso facto unworthy of having it. If Imams lack special powers or a special right to rule, then the only legitimacy they can possibly enjoy must come from their ability to assert their power, shawkat. This, for Ibn Taymiyyah, was the clinching reason to reject the Shia Imamate, for by the same logic the Umayyads and the Abbasids were worthier rulers than the Imams. This was why Sunni ulama had supported the caliphs in Damascus and Baghdad. Sunni theologians and political theorists have always measured the worth of authority in terms of power, a fact that has not been lost on modern day Arab dictators. The Shia revival, pages 95 to 96. The Wahhabis deemed the 1400-year-old Sunni hegemony a proof of the truth of Sunnism and the falsehood of Shiism. Neglectful of the hardships this hegemony throughout history has inflicted on the Shia science of Ahl al-Bayt and their fellow Shiites. The following Sunni hadith gives an exact inverse of their perception about who is on the right side of the history. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud reported that Allah's Messenger, God bless him and his family, said, "Indeed for us Ahl al-Bayt, Allah has chosen the hereafter over the world. And indeed my Ahl al-Bayt will soon face after me calamities, exiles and hardships until the time when a people will come from the eastern direction with whom will be black ensigns. So they will ask for good but will not be granted. Then they will fight, be victorious and be granted what they had asked for. But they will not accept it until they will transfer it to a man from my Ahl al-Bayt who will fill the world with equity as they, that is his foes, had filled it with tyranny." Ibn Majah 4082, Ibn Abi Shaybah 19573 and 37727. Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq said, "I wonder how you will be when the people of Al-Qaim, the uprisor, Imam Mahdi, will encamp in the mosque of Kufa and bring a novelty offensive to the Arabs." Al-Ghaibah of An-Numani, chapter 6, narration 319. The 12-er conviction in the ultimate triumph of Ahl al-Bayt and their Shia, despite centuries of persecution, is in line with this hadith and is resonated by Surah Al-Kahf, which is an antitype of the Wahhabi or Dajjali supremacist rejection of it. Section 5. Adam, peace be upon him, and Iblis. The story of Adam and Iblis has been mentioned in the Quran several times, suggesting that this story has important connotative lessons for us. One of the places of its mention is Surah Al-Kahf. Allah said, "And when we told the angels, fall prostrate before Adam, so all fell prostrate except Iblis. He was of the jinns, so he rebelled against his Lord's command. So do you choose him and his offspring for your friends instead of me, while they are an enemy unto you? Harsh is the exchange for evildoers." Al-Kahf 50. These verses show that Iblis was of the jinns, and despite being a jinn, Iblis reached the status of angels, which cannot be attained except through intense love for Allah, earning Allah's favor. And his inclusion among the angels made him conceited, and his conceit made him averse to the idea of anyone's superiority over him other than Allah's. And out of jealousy, Iblis refused to accept Adam's superiority over him, rebelling against Allah's command. And most children of Adam are tricked by Iblis and his tribes into following them, who are actually their enemies. So, even after once becoming one of the best slaves of Allah, conceit and jealousy can lead one to become one of the worst, as happened with many when Ali's coronation at Ghadir concluded with this divine declaration, "Today I have perfected your religion for you and have finalized my favor to you, and I am pleased with Islam, surrender as religion for you." Al-Ma'idah 3, Tafsir of Sunni scholar Ar-Razi. Unlike the Sunnis who love and respect all the companions of the Prophet, the 12ers love and respect only those of his companions who remained righteous till they died. The Sunni narrative has nothing to identify with the story of Adam and Iblis, while the very defining aspect of the 12er narrative identifies with this reoccurring Quranic story. Compare the following points of the 12th story of Ali and Abu Bakr with the previously mentioned points of the story of Adam and Iblis. Abu Bakr was a Makkan Qurayshite Sahabi. Abu Bakr became a chief aide to the Prophet. His inclusion among the Prophet's chief aides made him conceited. His conceit made him averse to the idea of any Sahabi's superiority over him. Out of jealousy, Abu Bakr refused to accept Ali's superiority over him, rebelling against his divinely ordained imamate after the Prophet's death. Most Muslims have been tricked by Abu Bakr and his associates into following them, who are actually their enemies. The Quranic stories of Adam and Iblis, the two sons of Adam, Joseph and his brothers, and Moses and his companions show that what the Twelvers believe about Abu Bakr, Umar and their likes, which the Sunnis assume to be impossible, is indeed possible. So a Sunni should give a chance to studying the Twelver narrative. Despite Sunni claims of Abu Bakr being humble, Tirmidhi has in merits of Abu Bakr this saying of his: "Am I not the most entitled of people to it? Am I not so and so? Am I not such and such?" Justifying his pretense to the caliphate in a letter to Ali, Abu Bakr belittled him, telling him that when he was an immature lad, Abu Bakr took deadly risks for Islam in Makkah. Muhadarat al-Abrar of Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi al-Maliki, Volume 2, page 179. The letter betrays both his conceit and his jealousy of Ali's unmatched valor in the battlefields. The story of Adam and Iblis also shows that Allah loves for the prophets and the saints to be venerated. When the angels fell prostrate before Adam, they were actually worshipping Allah by means of Adam. Though such prostration is prohibited in our Sharia, the story provides grounds for approaching Allah through His favorites, viz. Tawassul. Allah said, "O those who have faith, be conscious of Allah, seek the means of approach, wasila, to Him, and make jihad in His way in order that you may succeed." Al-Ma'idah 35. Zakaria used Mary's holy chamber for his prayer, which was answered. Al-Imran 37-39. And Jacob's eyesight returned when his eyes touched Joseph's shirt. Yusuf 93 and 96. Following the guidance of As-Thaqalain, the Quran and Ahl al-Bayt, the Twelvers use holy graves and sacred memorials as means of approach to Allah, like Zakaria, for their prayers to be answered, touching and kissing them, like Jacob, to seek Allah's blessings. The Wahhabis, who call the Twelvers grave worshippers, should answer: were the angels Adam worshippers? Did Zakaria worship Mary and her holy chamber? Did Jacob worship Joseph and his shirt? Are Muslims idolaters for praying near Maqam Ibrahim? Are Muslims idolaters for touching and kissing the black stone of the holy Kaaba? Who are following the angels and who are following Iblis, who rejected Adam as an intermediate between him and Allah? The Umayyad followers of Iblis had this same objection as of the Wahhabis. Sunni scholars Hakim and Tabarani reported with sound chains of narrators from Dawood ibn Abi Salih, approved of by Ibn Hajar in Taqrib, Volume 1, page 306, narration 1802, that Marwan once saw a man lying down with his mouth on the Prophet's grave. He said to him, "Do you know what are you doing?" The man was Abu Ayyub Ansari, the Prophet's companion, who replied, "Yes, I have come to Allah's messenger and not to a stone. I heard from Allah's messenger to not cry over the religion when its guardian is competent. Yes, shed tears over the religion when its guardian is incompetent." Hakim 8571. Dahabi agreed with Hakim in attesting it. Tabarani Awsat, Volume 1, page 94, narration 284. So shed tears over Islam, for the guardians of its heartland are the incompetent Wahhabis. The Twelvers have hadiths that teach seeking the intercession of the Immaculate Household while soliciting and worshipping Allah. The Wahhabis reject them as polytheistic fabrications, using against them some Quranic verses, for example Yunus 18, Ar-Ra'd 14, Az-Zumar 3, that actually refute those who deify, worship and solicit others as deities beside Allah for approaching Allah through their intercession. We will soon refute the Wahhabis from their sources, God willing. Arguing against Tawassul, they say that you cannot make the dead hear, quoting the Quranic verse, "And you cannot make hear those who are in the graves." Al-Fatir 22. The context draws comparisons for disbelievers not responding to the Prophet's Islamic call. But the Twelvers believe that for the one making tawassul, Allah makes hear the holy person his message when he pleases for him to be interceded for. As Allah said, "Indeed Allah makes hear whomever he wills for." Al-Fatir 22, referring to those who respond to the Islamic call. And Allah said, "And never think of those killed in Allah's way as dead. Rather they are living, with their Lord they have provision." Al-Imran 169. And Allah said, "Those whom they solicit besides him possess no power of intercession except those who bore witness to the truth while they were knowing." Az-Zukhruf 86. The prophets and the saints are thus in a higher special state of life after passing away. It is well known that Allah's Messenger, God bless him and his family, led the spirits of all the prior prophets in Salat in Al-Quds on the night of Isra and Mi'raj. Once he saw Moses, peace be upon him, going for Hajj, pronouncing the Talbiyah formula. Bukhari 1555. Allah said, the disbelievers despair of their people in the graves. Al-Mumtahana 13. Say, solicit them whom you assume to be gods beside him. They have no power to rid you of trouble nor to change. Those holy whom they solicit seek as the means of approach wasila to their Lord, whoever of them is closer to him. They hope for his mercy and fear his doom. Surah Bani Israel or Al-Isra 56 and 57. And we send not any messenger before you without inspiring him. There is no God except me, so worship me. And people say, the gracious has taken unto himself a son. Be he glorified. Rather, they are honored slaves. They do not precede him in statements and they comply with his commandment. He knows what is before them and what is behind them, and they do not intercede except for him whom he pleases for, and they are awestruck for fear of him. And should any one of them say, indeed I am a God besides him, so that one we should repay with hell, thus we repay wrongdoers. Al-Anbiya 25 to 29. No intercessor can be barring whom he allows for. Such is Allah your Lord, so worship him. Yunus 3. These verses very clearly mark the difference between polytheism and tawassul, explaining the issue of intercession. The following authoritative traditions from Sunni sources further corroborate the 12th understanding of tawassul, exposing the extremist Wahhabi bias against it. As reported by Anas ibn Malik, during the funeral of Imam Ali's mother Fatima bint Asad, the Prophet, God bless him and his family, prayed to Allah, forgive my mother Fatima bint Asad, teach her replying correctly to the questions and make her grave capacious with the right of your Prophet and the prior Prophets mediating. Tabarani Awsat Volume 1, pages 67 and 68, narration 189. Attested by Ibn Hibban and cited by Haythami in Majma' al-Zawaid, Volume 9, page 256 to 257. Mahmud Saeed Mamduh graded it Hasan in his Rafa al-Manara, page 147 to 148. Maysara reported that he asked, O Allah's Messenger, when first were you a prophet? He, God bless him and his family, replied, when Allah created the earth and turned to the heaven, then fashioned it as 7 heavens and created the throne, writing on the throne's leg, Muhammad, the Messenger of Allah, is the seal of the prophets. And Allah created the garden in which He made Adam and Eve dwell. So He wrote my name on the gates, the leaves, the domes and the tents, while Adam was still between the spirit and the body. Then when Allah Ta'ala quickened him, he looked at the throne and saw my name. So Allah informed him that He is the overlord of your children. So when Satan deceived them both, they repented and sought intercession to Allah with my name. Al-Wafa bi Ahwal al-Mustafa of Ibn al-Jawzi al-Hanbali, page 26, Darul Kutub al-Ilmiyah, Beirut, print. Suyuti's student Muhammad ibn Yusuf Salihi said, Ibn al-Jawzi reported it with a robust chain having no problem. Subul al-Rashad, Volume 1, page 86, Dar al-Kutub al-Ilmiyah, Beirut, print. During the caliphate of Uthman ibn Affan, a man repeatedly visited him with some need but was not attended to. Uthman ibn Hanaf told him to offer 2 rakat salat and then pray, O Allah, I ask you and turn to you through our Prophet Muhammad, the Prophet of mercy. O Muhammad, I turn through you to my Lord so that he fulfill my need. The man did so, and then Uthman ibn Affan attended to him and fulfilled his need. Then Uthman ibn Hanaf told the man of a blind man who had learned this prayer from the Prophet to regain his sight and had thus recovered from blindness by virtue of this prayer. Tabarani Saghir, Volume 1, pages 306 to 307, narration 508. Tabarani said, this hadith is sahih, attested, authentic. Haythami accepted Tabarani's attestation of it in his Majma' al-Zawaid, Volume 2, narration 3668, At-Targhib wa Tarhib of Mundiri, Salat al-Haja, Dalail an-Nubuwwah of Bayhaqi, volume 6, pages 167 to 168. Bukhari reported that Abu Nu'aym related to him that Sufyan related to him from Abu Ishaq, he from Abd ar-Rahman ibn Sa'd, that he said that Ibn Umar felt numbness in his leg, whereupon a man said to him, "Remember the most beloved of people to you." So he said, "Ya Muhammad, O Muhammad." Al-Adab al-Mufrad of Bukhari, page 404, narration 964, Tabaqat Ibn Sa'd, volume 1, page 144, biography of Ibn Umar, Musnad Ibn Jad, narration 2633. Ibn Hajar Asqalani quoted, Hakim said that he heard Abu Ali Nishapuri saying, "I was in extreme depression. That time I saw the Prophet in my dream. God bless him and his family." He said, "Go to the grave of Yahya ibn Yahya, pray for forgiveness and ask for help through his intercession. Your problem will be solved." I did so and my problem was solved in the morning. Tahdib of Ibn Hajar, volume 1, page 398. Ibn Hibban recorded, "Whenever I was afflicted with any problem during my stay in Tus, I would visit the grave of Ali ibn Musa, Ar-Rida, the 8th Imam. Allah's blessings be upon his grandfather and him, and would pray to Allah for my relief. My prayer would be answered and I would be relieved of that problem. And it is something I have tried out many times, finding it the same. May Allah make us die with love for the chosen one, Al-Mustafa, and his household. Allah bless him and all of them." Kitab Al-Thiqat of Ibn Hibban, volume 8, pages 456 to 457, narration 14411. These are some of the many proofs of tawassul present in Sunni sources. We dare the Wahhabis to declare all the authorities that transmitted these narrations, their Salaf, to be polytheistic brothers of the Twelvers, for believing in, practicing and teaching what the Wahhabis include in polytheism's definition. One of the narrations most cited by the Wahhabis against pilgrimages to shrines attributes to the Prophet restricting pilgrimages to only 3 mosques: Al-Masjid Al-Haram, the Prophet's Mosque, and Al-Aqsa Mosque. Bukhari 1189. This pseudo-hadith was manufactured when Muawiyah, who was already in control of Al-Aqsa Mosque, had captured Hijaz following the Tahkim arbitration event, bringing Al-Masjid Al-Haram and the Prophet's Mosque under his control. Muawiyah obviously did not want people to pilgrimage to Masjid Al-Kufa, where the commander of the believers, Ali Al-Mawla, was based. A clear proof of the falsehood of this narration is the fact that the Prophet himself used to pilgrimage to the mosque of Quba and pray there every Saturday, and Ibn Umar too used to do the same. Bukhari, narrations 1191 and 1193 and 1194. Muslim 1399. Once a brain is infected by the Wahhabi virus, its appetite for the extremist interpretation of Tawheed, Unitarianism, does not let it settle for the proofs of tawassul, however strong and numerous they may be, and so it can't help feeling the correct view of Tawheed as polluted by polytheism. There enters Kharijism. With the story of Adam and Iblis, Surah Al-Kahf postulates the 12 views on the Caliphate and Tawassul, and is thus an anti-type of the Wahhabi or Dajjali Takfiri war on Shiism. Section 6. Khidr and Dhul-Qarnayn, peace be upon them. Hadiths refer to the man accompanied by Moses in Al-Kahf 65 to 82 as Khidr, green. Khidr is identified with Islamic esotericism and mysticism, while Dhul-Qarnayn, the subject of Al-Kahf 83 to 98, is mostly identified with transcontinental conquests. The Wahhabis, who deny the existence of the 12th Imam, expect the promised Mahdi to be of their ilk, who will conquer the world for them and restore to Sunni Islam its pride and glory lost a century ago, and will have nothing like esoteric or mystic knowledge. Their role model Ibn Taymiyyah denied the esoteric and mystic knowledge of the Shia Imams, stressing that religious sources had no esoteric meaning, they had to be read and understood literally. Minhaj as-Sunnah, volume 2, pages 361 to 376. So the Wahhabi Mahdi has nothing to identify with Khidr, thus left as a one-eyed conqueror, having only grand conquests to identify with Dhul-Qarnayn, like Dajjal, or actually himself being Dajjal. Whereas the esoteric understanding of Quranic verses and hadiths and the mystic knowledge imparted by the infallible Imams are to the 12th creed, what the soul is to the body. So the 12th Imam shares esotericism and mysticism with Khidr and also with Dhul Qarnayn, see Al-Kahf 86 to 88 and 98, with whom he also shares the transcontinental conquests destined for him. Saduq recorded in his Kamal ad-Din report of Ahmad ibn Ishaq ibn Sa'd al-Ash'ari, quoting the 11th Imam Hassan al-Askari about his child Mahdi, peace be upon them. O Ahmad, in this community his example is like that of Khidr and Dhul Qarnayn, peace be upon them. Moses learned from Khidr that how seemingly good can actually be bad at times and how seemingly bad can actually be good at times, which indeed has to do with esotericism and mysticism. Just as Khidr revealed the realities behind his actions questioned by Moses, Shia hadiths predict the 12th Imam to reveal to the Sunnis some important realities of the Islamic history unknown to most of them. When Imam Hassan stepped down from the caliphate, he told his followers that had he not done so, Muawiyah would leave no Shiite alive on the earth. Ilal Ash-Shara'i of Saduq, chapter on the reason for Imam Hassan's peace with Muawiyah. People will realize this when Muawiyah's followers, the Sufyani and his Nasibi forces, will massacre Shia in the month and the land of Hajj after the promised Shia conquests of Makkah and Medina. In a sermon, Imam Hassan had likened his abdication to Khidr's making a hole in the ship to save it from the king grabbing every sound ship by force. The last ship of salvation, as in Hadith Tabarani Kabir volume 3 page 37, the 12th Imam was taken into occultation to be protected from assassination as every prior Imam was murdered. Moses thought of the youth killed by Khidr as an innocent soul killed unjustly. Khidr revealed that he was a disbelieving and rebellious son of believing parents. Exegetic traditions tell that he used to waylay, rob and kill travelers. Imam Mahdi will expose some big names thought of as innocents by the Sunni brothers. How many Sunnis know that Umar let not the Prophet document his legacy after he was poisoned? Bukhari 6897 and 7366. Abu Bakr and Umar robbed Imam Ali of the Caliphate. Tathbit al-Wasiyah of Imam Zaid. Umar slapped the Prophet's daughter Fatima, peace be upon them. Dalail al-Imamah of Tabrisi. Umar's assault on Fatima caused 3 of her ribs to break. The murder of her unborn son Muhassan, followed by her own martyrdom. Dalail al-Imamah of Tabrisi. Abu Lu'lu Shuja'uddin killed Umar to avenge Fatima. Haq al-Yaqeen. Uthman brought Hakam back to Medina, who had been exiled by the Prophet for mimicking him. Waqidi, Mas'udi, Yaqubi, chapter on Uthman's reign. Uthman rejected the prophetic documentation for the state treasuries. Bukhari 3111 and 3112. The pro-Ali insurgents called the killers of Uthman by the Sunnis included senior Sahaba like Ammar ibn Yasir and Abu Ayyub Ansari, may Allah be pleased with them. Hakim 5935, upheld by Dhahabi. The dilapidated wall repaired by Khidr belonged to 2 orphans whose father had been righteous, and there was beneath it a treasure belonging to them, for which Allah intended to be brought forth by the 2 after they reached adulthood, as a mercy from Allah. The Prophet's grandsons Hassan and Hussein were murdered for their claims to the caliphate. Karbala saw 18 princes of the prophetic household martyred, including Imam Hussein and all his sons except Ali as-Sajjad, who survived to become the 4th Imam, whose 8th lineal descendant Imam Mahdi will return to restore the caliphate to the Prophet's progeny, its rightful owners. The Wahhabi Mahdi has no representations in Khidr's revelations. As for Dhul Qarnayn, Surah Al-Kahf tells of his transcontinental conquests, his being Allah's chosen slave, his justice, his mercy on the believers and his harshness on the oppressors. But who is Dhul Qarnayn as it is not a name but a title meaning the man of two horns. Exegetic traditions show that the verses about Dhul-Qarnayn were among the verses revealed to the Prophet, God bless him and his family, to enable him to answer the questions which the Jewish scholars of Yathrib pre-Hijrah Medina had instructed the Meccan idolaters to ask him as a test of prophethood. Who could the Jewish scholars refer to as the man of two horns, whom the Quran describes with faith, piety, power and justice? Jewish sources Daniel chapter 8 verse 20 and Ezra chapter 1 verses 1 to 11 prove that he was the ancient Iranian emperor Cyrus the Great, and the two horns represent Persia and Media, ancient regions of Iran. So with the title Dhul-Qarnayn, the man of two horns, turning out to mean the man of Iran, what is its relevance to the Mahdi versus Dajjal case? In the 1920s, the Iranian city of Qum developed as a prime center of Shia learning to rival Najaf, the global Shia capital. Imam Musa al-Kazim had prophesied, "A man will call people to Allah from Qum. A mass will gather around him. Indeed, their hearts are firm like iron chunks, such that nothing can terrify or shake them. They do not get tired of war and they do not get afraid. They rely on Allah and they are the real righteous." Bihar al-Anwar, volume 60, page 216. The prophecy perfectly befits Ayatollah Sayyid Ruhullah Musavi Khomeini, the 1979 Islamic Revolution, the Iran-Iraq War, the Islamic Republic of Iran and its international and foreign policies. The tigers of the Islamic Republic of Iran are the promised mission of Qum. Imam Sadiq quoted Imam Baqir, peace be upon them, "Indeed they call this city Qum because the people of Qum will gather around Imam Mahdi, uprise with him, remain with him and help him." Bihar al-Anwar, volume 60, page 216. Imam Baqir said of the forces that will vanquish the Jews in the Holy Land in the end times, they are Mahdi and his companions. Imam Sadiq said of them, "I swear by Allah, they are of Qum. I swear by Allah, they are of Qum. I swear by Allah, they are of Qum." Tafsir Nur al-Thaqalain, exegesis of Surah 17, Ruku 1. So as the man of Iran, the 12th Imam qualifies for the title Dhul-Qarnayn, whereas the Wahhabis expect their pseudo-Mahdi to attack the country of Dhul-Qarnayn, Imam Mahdi, peace be upon him. As reported in Tirmidhi, Dajjal will enter the Iranian cities Kirman and Khuz with 70,000 troops. Surah Al-Kahf represents the 12th Imam, the real Mahdi, and is thus an antitype of the Wahhabis' pseudo-Mahdi, Dajjal. May Allah include us among the companions of the 12th Imam, peace and blessings be upon him and his progenitors. Ameen. Rise. Rise up in resistance to those tyrants and terrorists who inflict brutal atrocities on the Shiites of Fatima az-Zahra, for their condemning those heresiarchs who assassinated her father, attacked her house and burnt its doorway, thrashed and tortured her and the one in her womb, killing both, wronged her husband and made war on him, and murdered her sons and descendants. Answer the call of Zahra, join the Shia of Zahra, join the Islamic Revolution, join the people of Qum. Labbaik ya Zahra.